My son told me to come over, that he'd help me when I lost everything. But when I arrived with my suitcases, I found an empty house and a for sale sign. He had fled in the night rather than help his own father. I stood there betrayed and humiliated, feeling like the most foolish man alive. But what Mike didn't know was that I had just inherited $3.2 million, and I was about to become his worst nightmare. 2 days later, I appeared before him when he least expected it. What happened next taught him the most expensive lesson of his life. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. As a father from Chicago's North Side, I want to know how many parents around the world can relate to this pain. But let me back up and tell you how this all started. My name is Chris Morgan, and at 69 years old, I thought I knew everything there was to know about disappointment. I'd been living alone in my small apartment on Chicago's North Side for 8 years now, ever since my wife Susan passed. The place isn't much. Peeling wallpaper, a radiator that clanks like a ghost, and windows that rattle when the L train passes. But it was home. That Tuesday morning, I was nursing my second cup of coffee when the phone rang. Unknown number, which usually meant telemarketers. Mr. Morgan, this is Benjamin Walsh from Walsh & Associates. I'm an attorney here in downtown Chicago. My first thought was trouble. Had I forgotten to pay some bill? I'm calling about the estate of Harold Kowalski. I believe he was your neighbor. Harold, the old Polish man next door for the past decade. We'd bonded over Cubs baseball and our mutual hatred of the building's broken elevator. When he got sick last year, I started checking on him daily, bringing groceries when his arthritis flared up, sitting with him during those long, lonely afternoons. He passed 3 weeks ago. I found him peaceful in his recliner with a Cubs game still playing. I attended his small funeral, one of only 5 people there. Harold left specific instructions in his will. Mr. Walsh continued. He named you as his sole beneficiary. I nearly dropped the phone. I'm sorry, what? Mr. Morgan, Harold left you his entire estate. He was quite successful in real estate investments, though he lived modestly. The total value comes to approximately $3.2 million. The words hit me like a physical blow. $3.2 million. I'd never owned more than a few thousand at any given time. That's impossible, I stammered. Harold lived in the same building as me. He clipped coupons. He bought day-old bread. He was very private about his wealth. His note specifically mentions your kindness during his final years. He wrote, Chris Morgan showed me what family really means. He deserves to know that kindness doesn't go unnoticed. I had to sit down. Harold, my quiet neighbor who I'd helped with groceries and doctor's appointments, had left me a fortune. Me, a retired factory worker who'd lived paycheck to paycheck my entire life. Mr. Walsh explained the paperwork and legal processes, but I barely heard him. My mind was spinning, trying to process this impossible reality. After I hung up, I sat staring at the cracked linoleum floor. $3.2 million? It was more money than I'd ever dreamed of having, and that's when my thoughts turned to Mike. With this money, I began thinking about my son. The old photo on my mantel caught my eye as I sat there still processing the lawyer's words. It was taken 12 years ago at Mike's college graduation. There we were, father and son, arms around each other's shoulders, both grinning like we'd conquered the world. Mike had just landed his first job at an accounting firm. I was so proud I could barely contain myself. But looking at that picture now, I wondered when everything started to change. I remembered when Mike was 8 years old, missing his 2 front teeth, standing in our backyard after I'd fixed his broken bicycle chain. His gap-toothed smile was brighter than the summer sun as he looked up at me and said, Dad, you're my hero. Those 4 words sustained me through every double shift at the factory, every aching muscle, every sacrifice I made to give him a better life than I'd had. Susan used to say Mike had my stubborn streak and her gentle heart. After she died, it was just the 2 of us for a while. Mike was 34, then already married to Kathleen for 2 years. At first, he called every few days, checking on me, inviting me over for Sunday dinners. We'd watch football together, and for those precious hours, it felt like I still had family. Then Kathleen started making subtle changes. The Sunday dinners became monthly, then every few months. The phone calls grew shorter, more businesslike. Hey, Dad, just checking in. Everything good, great. Talk soon. Click. Kathleen was polite enough when I visited, but there was an ice-cold distance in her green eyes that made me feel like an intruder in their pristine suburban home. She'd smile with her mouth, but never her eyes, asking pointed questions about my health, my finances, my plans for getting more active with people your own age. The first birthday that hurt was my 67th. Mike called to wish me well, but couldn't come over because Kathleen had planned a weekend getaway to some spa in Wisconsin. Rain check Dad will celebrate when we get back. We never did. Christmas that year was worse. I'd bought thoughtful gifts, wrapped them carefully, and driven to their house in Naperville with a homemade apple pie, Susan's recipe. Kathleen answered the door in an expensive red dress, clearly ready to leave for some party. "Oh, Chris," she said, not bothering to hide her annoyance. "We're actually heading to my parents' place in Michigan. Didn't Mike mention that?" He hadn't. Mike appeared behind her, looking uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes. "Sorry, Dad. Last-minute change of plans. You understand?" I stood there on their doorstep, holding my pie, like some pathetic door-to-door salesman watching my son choose his wife's family over his father. Thanksgiving brought the same pattern. Easter, too. Every holiday became an exercise in creative excuses. Work commitments, travel plans, Kathleen's family obligations. Always something more important than spending time with the man who'd raised Mike single-handedly after his mother died. The worst part wasn't the rejections themselves. It was watching my son transform from the boy who called me his hero into a man who seemed embarrassed by my existence. When he did visit, which became increasingly rare, I could see him calculating how quickly he could leave, checking his phone, making excuses about early mornings or Kathleen waiting at home. I started to feel like a burden, a chore to be managed rather than a father to be loved. Sitting there with Harold's life-changing gift in my lap, I realized something had crystallized in my mind. All those years of wondering, of making excuses for Mike's behavior, of telling myself that this was just how adult children lived their lives, it all came down to one simple question. I needed to know if Mike truly loved his father or if I was just an obligation he tolerated out of duty. The plan came to me that very evening as I sat staring at Harold's inheritance paperwork spread across my kitchen table. I would test Mike, not with some elaborate scheme, but with the most basic human need. A father asking his son for help in a time of crisis. If Mike truly cared about me, he'd step up without hesitation. If I was just an obligation, then I'd finally have my answer. The story had to be believable. I couldn't just say I was broke. Mike knew I had my pension. It needed to be a sudden catastrophe that would strip away everything overnight. I crafted the perfect scenario. Bad investments I'd hidden out of pride, mounting medical bills from secret tests, credit card debt spiraling out of control. The final blow would be my apartment building being foreclosed, forcing all tenants to vacate within 24 hours. It was believable because it happened to people every day in America. One medical emergency, one bad decision, and a lifetime of savings could disappear in months. I practiced the conversation in front of my bathroom mirror like some amateur actor. "Mike, I need to tell you something, and it's not easy for me to say. I've made terrible financial mistakes, and now I'm paying the price. The building's being foreclosed on, and I have nowhere to go." The hardest part was the emotional manipulation I'd have to employ. I'd mention his mother, how disappointed she'd be. I'd talk about my wounded pride. I'd make him feel like the successful son who could save his foolish old father. It made me sick, but I had to know. I pulled out my old suitcases from the bedroom closet, 2 battered pieces of luggage that Susan and I had used for our Niagara Falls honeymoon 45 years ago. I packed them with enough clothes for a week, toiletries, and personal items to make the story convincing. As I folded my worn shirts, I kept thinking about that 8-year-old boy who'd called me his hero. Was I betraying that child's memory by testing the man he'd become? Or was I honoring it by refusing to accept that the love between us had died? I placed Susan's photograph carefully between my shirts wrapped in tissue paper. If Mike saw it when I unpacked, it would add authenticity. A desperate man clinging to his most precious possessions. The psychological warfare I was waging against my own son felt wrong on every level, but the alternative, continuing to live in doubt, continuing to feel like an unwanted burden, felt worse. Tuesday night I sat in my living room with the phone in my lap, staring at Mike's number. My thumb hovered over the call button for nearly an hour. This was it. Once I made this call, there would be no going back. I'd either discover that my son still loved me, or learn that the boy who'd called me his hero was truly gone forever. I took a deep breath and made my decision. Tomorrow I would call Mike. Wednesday evening arrived faster than I wanted. I sat in my worn armchair, phone trembling in my hands. 7:30 p.m., a reasonable time to call. My heart hammered as I pressed the call button. "Hey, Dad!" Mike's voice came through clear and warm. In the background, I could hear a television. "Mike, son, I need to talk to you about something serious." What's wrong? You sound upset. The concern in his voice gave me hope. Maybe I was wrong about everything. I've made some terrible mistakes, Mike. Financial mistakes I've been too proud to tell you about. I let genuine shame seep into my words. I've been struggling for months, but it's gotten out of control. Dad, what kind of mistakes? I made some investments last year, thought I was being smart with my retirement money, but they went bad. Really bad. Then I had medical tests that insurance didn't cover, put them on credit cards thinking I could pay them off quickly. Medical tests. Dad, why didn't you tell me you were having health problems? The worry in his voice made my stomach twist with guilt. I didn't want you to worry. But Mike, it's gotten worse. The credit card payments, medical bills, they've been piling up. I've been borrowing just to make minimum payments, and now they're foreclosing on the building. All tenants have to be out by tomorrow evening. I have nowhere to go, son. Silence stretched between us. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Jesus, Dad, why didn't you come to me sooner? I was too ashamed, too proud. Your mother always said my pride would be my downfall. Okay, let me think. I heard him moving around. How much do you owe? Maybe Kathleen and I can help with a debt or look into refinancing? Mike, I don't need money. I interrupted. I just need a place to stay for a few days while I figure out my next move. Maybe look into senior housing or find a small apartment I can afford. Of course, Dad. Of course you can stay with us. But something in his tone shifted. The response came too quickly, too smoothly, like he'd been expecting this exact request. Are you sure I don't want to impose on you and Kathleen? Don't be ridiculous. You're my father. Come over tomorrow morning and we'll figure everything out. Kathleen will understand completely. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. Kathleen, who had spent 5 years making it clear I wasn't welcome, would understand completely. Kathleen, who couldn't stand 2-hour dinners with me, would be fine with me moving in indefinitely. That's wonderful, son. I can't tell you how much this means to me. Don't worry about anything, Dad. Just pack what you need and come over around 9 tomorrow morning. We'll have the guest room ready. Thank you, Mike. I love you. Love you too, Dad. Get some rest. Everything's going to work out. After I hung up, I sat staring at the phone. Mike had said all the right words, expressed all the right concerns, made all the right promises. So why did I feel like I'd just been reading from a script? There was something off in Mike's voice, something that didn't ring true. Thursday morning came with the kind of crisp October air that usually lifted my spirits. Not today. I sat in the back of the taxi, clutching the handles of my 2 old suitcases, watching Chicago's skyline fade behind us as we headed toward the suburbs. The driver, a chatty guy named Miguel, kept trying to make conversation about the weather, the Cubs' disappointing season, anything to fill the silence. I nodded politely, but couldn't focus on his words. My mind was still replaying last night's phone call, that strange note in Mike's voice that I couldn't shake. Naperville's nice this time of year, Miguel said as we exited the highway. You visiting family? Something like that, I replied, staring out the window at the neat rows of suburban homes, each with their perfectly manicured lawns and 2-car garages. This was the American dream Mike had built for himself, far from the cramped Chicago apartment where I'd raised him. 20 minutes later, Miguel turned onto Oak Ridge Drive. I knew the address by heart. 847 Oak Ridge Drive. I'd sent Christmas cards there for 5 years, though I'd only visited a handful of times. Should be right up here, Miguel said, slowing down. What's the number again? 847. I said, then looked up to point out Mike's house. My blood turned to ice. There, planted squarely in the front yard like a tombstone, was a bright red for sale sign. Bold white letters proclaimed Coldwell Banker, with a phone number beneath it. That can't be right, I whispered, leaning forward in my seat. Driver, are you sure this is Oak Ridge Drive? Yeah, this is it. 847, right there. Miguel pointed to the house number clearly visible on the mailbox. I stared at Mike's house, or what used to be Mike's house, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe they were upgrading, moving to a bigger place. Maybe the sign was old, left over from when they'd bought it. Maybe I was having some kind of senior moment and had gotten confused about the address. Wait here, I told Miguel, my voice barely steady. I'll just be a minute. I climbed out of the taxi on shaking legs, leaving my suitcases behind. The for sale sign looked brand new, the metal stakes driven deep into the earth. There was even a small plastic box attached to it, presumably holding information sheets for potential buyers. I walked up the familiar brick pathway to the front door, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The decorative autumn wreath that Kathleen always hung was gone. The porch light that used to stay on was dark. I pressed the doorbell and waited. Nothing. I pressed it again, holding it longer this time. Still nothing. I knocked on the door. 3 sharp raps that echoed through what sounded like an empty house. "Mike, Kathleen, it's Dad. I'm here like we planned." Silence. I moved to the front window and cupped my hands around my eyes, peering through the glass into what used to be their living room. My legs nearly gave out. The room was completely empty. No furniture, no pictures on the walls, no coffee table where Kathleen used to arrange her expensive magazines. Nothing but bare walls and clean carpet, as if no one had ever lived there at all. I stumbled back to the taxi, my mind reeling. Miguel took one look at my face and got out to help me. "You okay, buddy? You look like you've seen a ghost." "They're gone," I said, my voice coming out as a croak. "They're gone." "Who's gone?" I couldn't answer him. I couldn't form the words to explain that my son, the boy I'd raised from birth, the man I'd called less than 12 hours ago, had looked me in the eye through the phone and lied. He'd told me to come over, told me Kathleen would understand, told me they'd have the guest room ready, all while knowing he was abandoning his home in the middle of the night. Miguel helped me back into the taxi, loading my suitcases while I sat there in stunned silence. As we pulled away from 847 Oak Ridge Drive, I caught one last glimpse of that red sign in the rearview mirror. My son had chosen to run away rather than help his father. "Excuse me, are you okay?" I looked up to see a middle-aged Latina woman approaching from the house next door. She had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and wore a cardigan despite the mild weather. "I'm Helen Rodriguez. I live right there. Are you looking for Mike and Kathleen?" Miguel rolled down his window. "You know what happened to the people who lived here?" Helen's face grew somber. "Oh my, you must be Mike's father. You didn't know they moved out." "Moved out?" I climbed out of the taxi. "I just talked to Mike last night. He told me to come over this morning. They left last night, around 10 o'clock. I was watching the late news when I heard this terrible commotion. A moving truck backing into their driveway. Men shouting instructions. A moving truck at 10 p.m. Who moves in the middle of the night unless something's terribly wrong? Mike and Kathleen were rushing around like their house was on fire, throwing boxes into this big truck. Did you talk to them?" "I tried. I went outside to ask if everything was all right. Kathleen barely looked at me. She was barking orders at the movers, telling them to hurry, that they had to be done by midnight." Helen paused. "She told the moving men it was a family emergency, that they had to leave immediately for out of state. But Mr. Morgan, I've lived next to them for 3 years, and I've never seen Kathleen move that fast for any emergency." "What about Mike?" "That's the strangest part. Mike looked guilty ashamed. Kept his head down, wouldn't make eye contact. When I asked if everything was okay, he just mumbled something about taking care of family business." "Family business?" While I was worried about imposing on them, my son was running away from me. "There's something else," Helen said, lowering her voice. "Around 10:30, I heard Kathleen on her phone. She was standing by their garage, and sound carries in this neighborhood." "What did she say?" "She said, 'We can't let him stay here, David. We have to leave before he arrives in the morning. Ik hope.' Then something about how she'd worked too hard to build this life, to let it get complicated by family obligations." Family obligations. That's what I was to Kathleen. There's more. She also said Mike doesn't have the backbone to say no to his father, so I'm making the decision for both of us. I felt something inside me break and reform into something harder. Kathleen hadn't just convinced Mike to abandon me. She'd orchestrated the entire thing. She'd decided I wasn't worth the inconvenience, and my weak-willed son had gone along with it. "Mr. Morgan, this isn't the first time I've seen Kathleen treat you poorly. Every time you've visited, I've watched from my kitchen window. She never seemed happy to see you. Always checking her watch, finding reasons to cut visits short. I knew she didn't like me, but I never thought—" "She's controlled Mike from the day they moved in. I've watched that man become a shadow of himself. The few times I talked to him alone, he seemed different. Warmer, more genuine. But the moment Kathleen appeared, it was like watching someone put on a mask." Helen placed a gentle hand on my arm. "I'm so sorry this happened to you. No parent should be treated this way." Standing there on Oak Ridge Drive, I finally understood the truth. Kathleen hadn't just influenced my son. She had systematically turned him against me, convinced him that I was a burden rather than a father to be loved. Kathleen had transformed my son into someone who could betray his own father. As Miguel pulled away from Oak Ridge Drive, I sat with my phone in trembling hands. The numbness was wearing off, replaced by pure, righteous anger. I scrolled through my contacts and found Benjamin Walsh's number. "Mr. Morgan, how can I help you today?" "Benjamin, I need your help with something urgent. something that's going to sound crazy. I told him everything. The test, the phone call with Mike, the empty house, Helen's revelations about Kathleen's manipulation. With each detail, I could hear Benjamin's breathing grow heavier. "Jesus Christ, Chris," he said when I finished. "I've handled family disputes, but this is beyond cruel. I want to buy his house, Benjamin." Silence. "Then I'm sorry, what?" "Mike's house. It's for sale. I want to buy it, and I want to be there when he shows up to sign the closing papers." "Chris, I understand you're angry, but—" "I have $3.2 million, Benjamin. Harold's money. Money that Mike doesn't know exists." I could hear Benjamin pacing. "You want to confront him at the closing. I want him to look me in the eye and explain how he could do this to his father. I want Kathleen to see that the family obligation she was so eager to avoid just became her new landlord." Benjamin was quiet for a long moment. "It's brilliant in a twisted way. But Chris, once you do this, there's no going back. My relationship with Mike died last night when he chose to run away rather than help me. What I'm doing now is just making it official. Give me the address. I'll call the listing agent immediately." I rattled off the Oak Ridge Drive address with the Coldwell Banker information. "I'll call you back within the hour." 45 minutes later, my phone rang. "The asking price is $485,000, Benjamin reported. "It's been on the market for exactly 12 hours. Several inquiries, but no official offers yet. Offer them $500,000, cash. No inspections, no contingencies. I want this deal closed as fast as legally possible." 500. That's 15,000 over asking. "I don't care about the money, Benjamin. I care about being in that room when Mike realizes what he's lost. They can probably close by Friday afternoon if we move fast. Day after tomorrow." "Perfect. And Benjamin, I want you to make sure I'm the one who hands Mike the keys at closing. I want to see his face when he realizes who bought his house." "You want to be at the closing table?" "I want to be the surprise guest at my son's going-away party." After I hung up, I leaned back in the taxi seat and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of taking control. For too long, I'd been the passive father, accepting whatever scraps of attention Mike and Kathleen threw my way. I'd made excuses for their behavior, convinced myself this was just how modern families worked. But Harold's gift had given me something more valuable than money. It had given me power. The power to show my son exactly what kind of man his father really was. The power to demonstrate that kindness and loyalty weren't weaknesses to be exploited, but strengths that commanded respect. Mike thought he was escaping his obligations by running away in the night. He had no idea that his father was about to become the most important person in his immediate future. In 2 days, Mike would discover who his new landlord really was. Friday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth that reminded me of the day Susan died. I'd been awake since 4 a.m. sitting at my kitchen table with cold coffee, watching the sun paint Chicago's skyline gold. Today was the day I would face my son. Benjamin had confirmed everything the night before. The closing was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the Naperville Title Company. Mike and Kathleen would be there to sign away their house, expecting to meet some anonymous cash buyer. They had no idea the buyer was the father Mike had abandoned 3 days ago. I spent the morning thinking about the 40 years I'd raised Mike alone after Susan's heart attack. He was only 6 when she died, barely old enough to understand that Mommy wasn't coming home. I remember holding him that first night, both of us crying, promising everything would be okay, even though I had no idea how. But I kept that promise. I worked double shifts at the Ford plant, came home exhausted and covered in grease, only to help Mike with homework at the kitchen table. When he needed new shoes, I ate peanut butter sandwiches for 2 weeks to save money. When he wanted Little League, I picked up weekend construction work for the equipment and fees. I never complained, because that's what fathers do. They sacrifice without keeping score, without expecting anything, except maybe a birthday phone call and the knowledge they raised a good man. Somewhere along the way, I'd failed at that last part. I pulled my best suit from the closet, navy blue wool that I'd bought for Susan's funeral. It still fit, though, loose around the shoulders. I paired it with the silver tie Susan gave me for our 20th anniversary, the one she said made me look distinguished. Standing in the bathroom mirror, I practiced what I'd say to Mike. I'd rehearsed dozens of times, but the words still felt foreign. The truth was, no words would be adequate. How do you tell your child they've broken your heart? How do you explain their betrayal has changed you into someone you barely recognize? I thought about Harold, my quiet neighbor who lived modestly while sitting on a fortune. He'd left me his money because I'd shown him kindness without expecting anything in return. The irony wasn't lost. A stranger had valued my compassion more than my own son did. But Harold's gift had given me more than financial security. It had given me power to demand answers, to force Mike to confront what he'd done. For the first time in years, I wasn't asking permission to exist in my son's life. I slipped Harold's inheritance letter into my jacket pocket, along with the house keys Benjamin would hand me at closing. Physical proof of who I really was. Not the desperate, broken man Mike thought he'd escaped, but someone with means to change the course of all our lives. The drive to Naperville felt both eternal and instantaneous. I'd hired a car service. I wanted to arrive with dignity, not fumbling out of a taxi. As we pulled into Midwest Title Services parking lot, I saw Mike's silver Honda Civic already there. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands were steady. This wasn't the trembling old man who'd sat devastated in a taxi 3 days ago. This was someone who'd found his backbone. Someone who'd remembered that respect isn't given. It's earned, and sometimes it's taken. I straightened my tie one final time and stepped out of the car. The moment of reckoning had finally arrived. The title company's lobby smelled like fresh coffee and leather. I walked up to the receptionist. "I'm here for the Morgan closing," I said. "Of course, Mr." She paused, waiting. "Morgan, Chris Morgan." Her eyebrows raised. She'd clearly been expecting someone else. "Conference room B just down the hall. They're already getting started." Through the glass door I could see them. Mike sat at a long wooden table, wearing the same blue shirt from our last Christmas dinner. Kathleen sat beside him in a cream blazer, her blonde hair pulled back perfectly. They were leaning over papers with their realtor. Benjamin was already there, seated across from them. When he saw me, he gave an almost imperceptible nod. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "Sorry I'm late," I said, stepping inside. Mike's head snapped up. The color drained from his face. "Dad," his voice barely a whisper. Kathleen's mouth fell open. "Hello, son," I said, taking the empty chair across from him. "I believe you know why I'm here." The realtor looked confused. "I'm sorry, there seems to be some mistake. We're waiting for the buyer." "That would be me," I said calmly, pulling Harold's inheritance letter from my jacket. "Chris Morgan, I'm the cash buyer." Mike stared like I was a ghost. "I don't understand." "Dad, what are you doing here? How did you—" $3.2 million. I cut him off. "That's what my neighbor Harold left me when he died. Harold Kowalski, the old man I helped with groceries for 10 years. He left me everything because he said I showed him what family really means." Kathleen found her voice. "This is impossible. You said you were broke." "I lied." I looked directly at Mike. "I wanted to test something. I wanted to know if my son would help his father in need, or if I was just an obligation to be avoided." Mike's hands shook. "Dad, I can explain." Can you explain why you agreed to let me stay, then fled in the middle of the night? Why you chose to abandon your father, rather than inconvenience your wife?" "It wasn't like that," Mike stammered. Kathleen thought, I repeated. "Not you. Kathleen." I turned to my daughter-in-law, who sat rigid. "Tell me, Kathleen, what exactly did you think when you heard my son's father needed help?" She said nothing. Benjamin cleared his throat. "Shall we proceed? Mr. Morgan has the funds ready." For 30 minutes we sat in uncomfortable silence while papers were signed. Mike kept trying to catch my eye, but I focused on the documents. When it was over, the realtor handed me keys. "Congratulations, Mr. Morgan. You're now the owner of 847 Oak Ridge Drive." I stood and looked at my son. "Mike, I want you to understand something. I didn't do this for revenge. I did this because you needed to learn that actions have consequences. You chose to treat your father like a burden instead of a blessing." Tears streamed down Mike's face. "Dad, please. I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake." "Yes, you did. But more importantly, you showed me who you really are. And that's something I needed to know." I walked toward the door, then turned back. "I hope someday you'll remember that 8-year-old boy who called me his hero. Because that boy understood something you've forgotten. Family isn't about convenience. It's about showing up, especially when it's hard." As I left that conference room, I thought about all the parents watching this story, wondering about their own children. We raise them with love, sacrifice everything for their happiness, and hope they'll remember those lessons when we need them most. But sometimes our children forget. Sometimes they choose comfort over character, convenience over compassion. And sometimes, as painful as it is, we have to let them face the consequences of those choices. To every parent out there who's ever felt forgotten, who's ever wondered if their sacrifices mattered, they did. Your love shaped them even if they can't see it now. And to every adult child watching this, call your parents, visit them, Don't wait until it's too late to show them they matter. Because sometimes we have to lose everything to realize what truly matters. 3 months have passed since I handed Mike those keys. The anger has softened into something deeper, understanding. God works in ways we never expect, using Harold's gift, not just to reveal truth, but to create opportunity for growth. These grandpa stories aren't just about punishment, they're about awakening. Mike has been attending counseling, learning to stand up to Kathleen's manipulation. Last week, he visited me alone for the first time in 5 years. We sat on my porch, two broken men trying to rebuild what betrayal stories like ours often destroy completely. He's filed for divorce, choosing his father over a woman who poisoned our relationship. The Lord teaches us that redemption comes through consequences, not avoidance. My betrayal stories had to unfold this way. Sometimes love requires tough lessons. I've learned that protecting our children from their mistakes isn't kindness, it's enabling weakness. These grandpa stories remind us that respect isn't inherited, it's earned through actions. God gave me Harold's blessing so I could teach Mike what real family loyalty means. The hardest betrayal stories often lead to the strongest foundations if we're brave enough to rebuild. To parents feeling forgotten, your sacrifices matter. To adult children, honor those who gave you everything before it's too late. Don't let pride destroy what the Lord intended to be sacred. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs this reminder. Comment below about your own family journey. Healing begins with honest conversation. Subscribe for more real-life stories about faith, family, and finding strength in our darkest moments.